Good afternoon, folks. This is Father Walsh, and I just want to take a very brief look at the readings for Sunday. And the Gospel reading is from the Gospel according to St. John, which is sort of unusual because this year we're in the Gospel of St. Luke. So certainly John's is different from the other three. In fact, John is very different from the other three, and you just need to be aware of that anytime you read the Gospel of St. John. So consequently, I think this Gospel reading, which is the wedding feast in Cana in Galilee, it looks like a simple story, but it's sort of a strange story because at the wedding feast, there's no mention of the bride or groom. So, which is, you you imagine if it's a story about a wedding, that something about the bride and groom has, would be said, but in essence, they're not mentioned at all. It's just about the fact that the wine runs out. And it's obviously Mary's mother, Jesus' mother, Mary, feels that that's obviously going to be a problem. So why did the wine run out? Well, we don't know for sure, but it's suggested that when Jesus came to the wedding, he was invited to the wedding, but it says he brought his disciples with him. So maybe those were the ones who took care of the wine real quickly. Anyway, it's interesting with regard to the whole question of the wine running out. Mary is very concerned, and so Mary said to Jesus, she says, "They have no more wine." And Jesus said, "Woman, how does this concern of yours affect me?" That seemed like a very strange response. He says, "My hour has not yet come." Well, his hour really, what he's referring to there is his hour, and it's mentioned several times in John's Gospel, really is concerned with his death on the cross. So that's quite a ways off at that point in time. But in essence, he ignores almost what Mary says to him. And somebody actually, we're talking about it in class the other day, and it's a good example of of the intercession of Mary. We shouldn't be afraid to intercede with Mary, because she didn't, when Jesus sort of cut her off, that didn't stop her. She says she turned to the waiters and she says, "Do whatever he tells you." So she totally ignored Jesus and what he said to her. And of course, the rest of the story is fairly obvious, that Jesus told them to put the water into water jars, into 6 water jars, and all of a sudden, when they did so, and the head waiter tasted it, he discovered that the water had been turned into wine. And he said, usually he said at parties, the good wine is drank first. He says, but you kept the good wine. You kept the good wine until now. So there's sort of with 6 stone water jars full of wine. It's sort of an abundance. Okay, it represents an abundance of wine, and you find the same sort of this. And this is supposedly the first miracle that Jesus performed. You find the same sort of story in the multiplication, or the changing water into wine. The other one that's very like that is the multiplication of the loaves, where with a couple of loaves, the multitudes are fed, and there are 12 baskets full of fragments left over. And it's a reminder to us that in the era of Jesus, that anything that's done, usually the result is an abundance, more than you can actually use. Anyway, as I say, it's a brief story that it doesn't tell you too much about anything other than the fact that water was changed into wine. But I think the problem is with this story, with John's Gospel. It's not a problem, but in John's Gospel, there's sort of, you can take John's Gospel literally, but also it's very metaphoric. Okay, so there's sort of deeper meaning involved here, and I cannot tell you too much about that with regard to this passage, other than the fact that the whole notion of a wedding covenant between a man and a woman, like what you find in the Bible, the setup in the Old Testament is very similar. That is, it's a covenant. It's a covenant between God and his people. And on the one hand of the covenant, you have God who is like the groom, and his people are like the bride. And a covenant is a bilateral agreement. Okay, there are certain requirements on the part of each individual. The original covenant, of course, was made in chapter 24 of the book of Genesis. But from that time onwards, what you find is that God continues to remain. I will be your God. He continues to remain faithful to his side of the agreement, whereas the people of Israel, time and again, they violated their covenant. And time and again, like if you go to the book of Hosea, you find that God is sort of like a lover, wooing his people, calling them back into relationship with him. Well, they come back again, and then they fall away again. So that's really is the story of the Old Testament, the story of fidelity on God's part and infidelity on the part of his people. So you find it in chapter 31 of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 31 and following. Jesus said, or God speaks through the prophet Jeremiah, and he says, "Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judea, and it won't be like the covenant I made in the past. This one I will write in their hearts." Now, that covenant was obviously fulfilled with Christ on the cross at the Last Supper. He said, "This is my body which is given for you. This is my blood which has been poured out for you, the blood of the new and eternal covenant." So God in the person of Jesus was made this lasting covenant with his people. Now, what does that have to do with this story of the wedding in Cana and Galilee? Well, as I say, the covenant is sort of the connection, just as you have a marriage covenant calling for fidelity. The same is true with regard to this covenant here between God and his people. So a permanent covenant is made at the Last Supper, and where the multiplication of wine may come in, or it seems as if it comes in, is that the sort of the abundance of wine in this instance is the fact not only is the covenant made, but the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is sort of like the abundance of wine that's always available to God's people after the giving of that covenant. So this may sound like it's not simple stuff, but it truly is. It's a beautiful message, really, from the Gospel of St. John, but it's not an easy one. Thank you.